Hey everyone, we're going to be taking a look at making selections with different selective tools in this demonstration. We've already gone over this in class, but I wanted to make sure you had a tutorial video so you could watch it over and over again if you wanted to. Now, it doesn't really matter what I do to this image, in terms of the layers that I use and so on, although I'll try and show you some different techniques. What I really want you to pay attention to is utilizing these different selective tools. Now, one of the first tools that we got into was called the Quick Select tool. That's in the upper left-hand corner, upper left-hand side of the interface here. And it's a Quick Select tool because it basically allows you to very quickly make these selections by just dragging the mouse over the area that you want to select out. There's another tool under that section called the Magic Wand tool. It's pretty good. It can be used for certain things, but I'll show you some different techniques where you really won't ever have to use the Magic Wand, because by matching or using the Quick Select tool with another feature called the Color Range, you can actually get better selections faster, typically anyways. And that's what we're going for. We want to speed up your workflow. We want to make sure that you can control all of these different aspects. And you want to use different selection tools for different reasons. Because sometimes if you've got an out of focus thing in the image, the quick select doesn't work very well. Whereas maybe sometimes the color range doesn't work very well, or a lasso tool doesn't work very well, or a brush, right? You've always got that brush capability once you've got a layer mask. It's very simple to use. Now, typically though, I would start out with the quick select. It's an amazing tool, and you literally just click and drag over the object that you want to select out. And this is going to do a pretty good job on here. You can see I missed down here in this section, and I'm just going to size the brush to make it a bit smaller. So if I leave the brush really large, it's going to think I want this very large area of pixels, right? Where maybe in this section back here, I just want to get her running suit, right? So I can do that with a smaller brush. And what I'm doing is I'm just using the left and the right bracket to size the brush. There are actually a couple shortcuts for resizing brushes. I just stick with that left and right bracket because that's what I've used for years, and it seems to just work for me. Now, if I want to remove a portion of an object from our selection, I can hold down the Option button on my keyboard. So by just clicking and dragging, I'll be adding stuff to the selection. By holding the Option key down and then clicking and dragging, I'm removing stuff from the selection. And that shortcut is going to ring true with basically all of these selective tools. The Lasso tool works that way. The Magic Wand will work that way. All of them basically that we're going to be getting into. So I want to make sure I've just selected the entire object. I don't want this area in here. So again, I'm just holding the Option button down. Now, it's not going to be perfect. And if I were to just go and make a new adjustment layer, right, it's going to basically take what we have selected, and it's only going to apply our adjustment with the adjustment layer to the thing that we've selected. So if I go ahead and I click on this adjustment layer rather, and notice what happens in our curves adjustment layer, right? I have my selection only on the red portion of our monk's garb there. Now, I don't want that. I'm going to go back. So by hitting Command Z on my keyboard, I'm able to go back, undo. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm just going to clean up my selection because I can see my quick select wasn't perfect here. And I can do this by sort of sticking with my quick select using a really small brush, or what I might do is switch to my Lasso tool, because this is going to allow me to sort of manually select things out. And this is where a Wacom tablet comes in handy. I'm not actually even using a Wacom tablet right now, but this would be much, much faster if I was using a Wacom tablet, and I'd be a little bit more precise. And what we're doing right now is I want to, here, watch this. If I just use my Lasso tool and I click right here, it actually deselects everything we've done so far. So if I'm attempting to add to my selection, I hold the Shift button down on my keyboard, and you can see that the lasso goes to a plus. If I want to remove something from a selection, I hold the Option button, right? So Option removes, and Shift allows us to add. So I want to remove certain sections, like right in here. And basically with the Lasso tool, what I need to do is I need to just make like a little circle. I need to encompass the thing that I don't want, right? And I'll go ahead and go back to where I started the selection, and that's going to remove the effect, or rather remove the the tool from selecting this stuff. And I want to be really precise with these selections, especially if I'm going to make a dramatic change to what we're doing to the image. So if I was just going to make a really subtle, contrast change, I could probably get away with just brushing an effect in. But if I want to change the color of this from, this very vibrant magenta to something else, or if I wanted to make a really dramatic effect on anything in the image, I need to make sure that my selection is really well dialed in. So I've got to go in and make sure I've encompassed all of these different things. And again, I'm just using the lasso tool to do this. So I'm going to remove this section, and I'm going to leave the selection not perfect because I want to show you another way of cleaning this stuff up, and then I'll show you how to clean this up, because you're always going to miss something. The selection's never going to be perfect right off the bat. So I'm going to get it pretty close. Spend a couple minutes at it. I've zoomed out. The shortcut for that is just Command minus. Or Command plus to zoom in or to zoom out. Now we've got a pretty decent selection. Let's say I want to change the color of that object. I've got to add 2 layers right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is move up into my layers section, hit new, and then go into my layer. Right? So I literally just click on new layer. And then the shortcut for that is Shift Command N. I don't expect you to know that shortcut, but definitely learn your shortcuts. They're going to help quite a bit. Here's the new layer section, and what I want to do is rename this. So I'm going to rename this to saturation, and I'm going to go ahead and change my mode to saturation. Click the OK button, and this gives me a new layer called Satur. And what I need to do is add a layer mask. So basically by adding a layer mask, I'm going to say that anything I do to that layer, it's only going to affect what we've selected. And to add a layer mask, the quickest and easiest way is to move down to the bottom portion of your layers panel and just click Add Layer Mask. Right? And now we've got our layer mask. By the way, if you ever want to see what the layer mask looks like, you can do a couple things. You can hold the command button down and click on the layer mask. This is going to give you your marching ants. Or if you hold Option and then click on it, it will actually show you a black on white selection. So you can get a good feel for exactly what's being selected. Again, that's holding Option and clicking on the layer mask. Now, what I want to do, because I want to change the color of that thing, is I want to make sure my mask looks pretty good. And then I'm going to fill my layer with gray. Right? And I'm going to do that because I've got it set to a saturation layer. And what it'll do is it will desaturate that object for us. So I'm going to move over into my into my colors. So you've got your foreground and your background color on the left-hand side here. There's a lot here. Again, what I want you to really pay attention to is the selection tool. This is just a separate technique that's going to be helpful. If you don't memorize that, that's fine. I don't really mind. We can sort of go over this stuff again. But the selections are what's really, really important. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make this middle gray. Click OK. And then I'm going to use my fill tool somewhere. I just used a shortcut, which is Shift-Delete. And that's going to allow me to fill my whole layer in. But there's actually a tool that will let us do this. And I've got to remember exactly where it is in my tool set. And it's not there. Oh, it's under the gradient tool. So you've got your gradient function. I'm going to use the paint bucket function. We've talked about the gradient tool a little bit, but I just want to fill this with gray. Right now, he's got this gray, portion of the garb on, and you can also see where I didn't do a good job selecting. Right, so there's still magenta in there. We'll clean that up in a minute, because the other thing that I want to do is change the color. Let's say to something very, very different than what it was or what it is. The fastest way to do this is to actually duplicate our saturation layer. So I'm going to click on our layer, drag that down until you see this. There's like a little sheet of paper that has a dog ear in the lower left-hand corner. If I go and click into that, it duplicates that layer. I'm going to rename this one Color. And then I've got my nice selection. I've got to go into my blending modes, and I'm going to change it from saturation to color. And then I'm going to hit Shift-Delete again, right? Because that's the same thing as what we did with the paint bucket, except this time I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose a color. So let's see what happens with blue, right? So I'm going to maybe make it right about there. Click OK, and now he has a blue. I don't know if that's a shawl or exactly what we call that, but his garb is now blue. Right? It's a little bit too light, So what I might do is actually go and change that color to something a little bit darker. Click OK, click OK. It darkens that down just a touch, and then we can even desaturate that just a little bit if it's looking unnaturally saturated. Now here's our issue. Our selection is not perfect, right? If we move down here, you still got a little bit of that magenta. That looks really funky, really weird. So the solution to that in this situation is really to just go into our layer mask and paint it. So I'm going to click onto the layer mask on the right hand side. Again, using a Wacom tablet, this is going to be much faster, but I'm just going to go ahead and paint that in. Oh, look, my opacity, my brush opacity is at 10%. I want it at 100%. So I'm going to bring that up to 100%, and I'm just going to brush that. And I'm actually doing it the wrong way because I need to make sure my foreground color, right, is white. Because if you remember, on a layer mask, white reveals, black conceals. So I'm going to go ahead and paint that. This is going to give us the gray on that area because I'm on my saturation layer, and I have two different layers and layer masks working. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint it gray to start. And then what we'll be able to do is actually just click and drag on this layer mask, so I only have to paint once to get it on that next layer. And sometimes, like in this case, because the blue is actually pretty close to gray, it blends nicely. So we don't even have any of the saturation coming through right now where we're cleaning this up. But we will want it. We will want to make sure that it goes blue. And then the other thing that's happening is that we've got this hard edge, right? Because we didn't do what's called a feather. We have this really hard edge selection, which works in this situation, but I want to show you a tool called Refine Edge that's going to allow us to kind of control exactly what the selection is doing a lot more, and it's almost completely automated. So this part of the workflow is sort of manual. I've got to actually go in and brush things. The other portion is going to allow us to kind of just clean up like this edge. See how it's going a little bit magenta, it's a little bit white? Well, I'll show you how to clean that in just a second. Now, let's say we're happy with our selection and our brush. Kind of messed up right here, so I'll paint that out right there. And I want to basically make this layer mask apply to our other layer. To do that, you hold the Option button down, and then you just click and drag the layer mask up into the layer that you want to apply that mask to. This is important. You're going to be doing this in your assignment. So what you're again going to do is you want to actually take that layer mask and place it over there. So I'm going to say yes. And what you'll now notice is the stuff that was just gray is now blue. Right? The stuff that we just painted in that didn't have the blue saturation applied to it a minute ago is now nice and clean. The other thing that you'll notice is you can see where I kind of screwed up on my brushing. Goes over the edge. That's not real clean. You can see I messed up right here as well. But before we fix that, let's take a look at the Refine Edge. So I've clicked on my layer mask, and it doesn't matter right now which layer mask I'm clicked on, because both of them are really going to do the same thing for me. And what we're going to end up doing is, again, clicking and dragging to duplicate those layer masks together. So I've clicked on one of them, then I move up into my Select section, and I go down to Refine Mask. Now, Refine Mask is going to allow us to basically clean up our masking that's occurring in here. And what's also happening is it doesn't look so good. I kind of screwed up, I think. It's in here somewhere. There we go. I just had the wrong setting on. So marching ants, this is going to show us what our selection looks like via those marching ants. We can actually look at this stuff with different techniques. What's happening too is that I don't think I've got one of the right settings on. Let's take a look. I've got my smart object there, got my saturation layer, color layer. Let's actually load the selection. So Command click, right? That loads those marching ants. Move up into our Select section, Refine Edge, and there we go. So now we can get a better idea as to what's happening. So just load the selection first. That's going to help so that you can actually see what's happening. Now, what these tools do. First off, you can see the original and see the radius. So the radius is going to be something that we can affect around the edges. You have a Smart Radius checkbox, which basically is the software trying to figure out the edges and then figure out what it should do with the edge of our mask when I start to move my selections. right? So, and this is not a good place to do this, but a good image, good example to do this. But basically, like if I had little pieces of grass or something, and I wanted to make sure that my selection looked good and the grass was intersecting, our object, it was coming in front of him or something, I would want to make sure that the selection looks good. I'm going to use that radius tool, and that's going to help with the smart radius checkbox on to kind of select that out. We don't need that here. What I want to do is sort of smooth out our edge, right? And actually feel free to slide all of these sliders left and right. It's the best way to get a really good feel for what's happening. The smooth slider is basically going to find any sort of hard, janky edges, and it's going to sort of smooth it out. The feather tool, if I bring that all the way up, you can see what it's going to do for us. Well, I don't want to bring it to 1,000 pixels. Let's bring it up and be a little bit more subtle. It sort of blurs the edge of the selection for us. It creates this nice sort of transition from what we're selecting to what we're not selecting, instead of having a really hard-edged selection. That feather's going to help. Usually, and it's going to be dependent upon the size of the object that you're selecting. It's dependent upon the resolution of your image. But that feather tool, you usually don't have to go too far up past 2.4 or 3 if your object is really sharp. If your object is out of focus, you would probably want to bring your feather slider up a lot further when you're making those selections. So I'll smooth that out. The contrast slider, this is going to give us more of a hard edge, but what's cool about it is that it works in tandem with the smooth and the feather. So you'll smooth out the edge, and then you can get a little bit more contrast to your edge using the contrast slider. Then your edge shift is going to allow you to move outward from what you've selected or inward from your selection, sort of all at the same rate. And what you can see here is where I didn't brush still has a really hard edge. Where I did brush has a much softer edge, because of this shift edge capability that we've got here. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you use that. When you use any of these, if I go in and use that brush capability, it affects the edge only of a certain section of our selection. Whereas, the other way we selected was with the quick select, and it's this very sort of abrupt, hard-edged selective tool. Now, I like what we've done here. We've kind of cleaned up that selection, so I'm going to click OK. And that's going to load for us. I'm going to go ahead and actually delete our previous layer mask. And I'm going to load a new layer mask just to make sure that the effects that we just had take. And I'm going to click Add Layer Mask. That's much cleaner. It's not perfect yet, but it's much, much cleaner. And I'm going to go ahead and just replace our saturation layer with our saturation layer mask with the color layer mask. So again, that's holding Option, clicking, and dragging. And if we zoom in here, you can, again, I could probably clean that up, and then I could definitely clean this up. That's just with the brush, right? A small brush in this case. And this is a little bit cleaner than it was. I think the way to take care of that in this case is probably to go into the saturation section, because I don't need that area to go blue so much, but I definitely want to make sure that it's not going magenta, because that's really noticeable. And I think what's also happening is I have an aberration around the edge of the monk here, and therefore there's other ways of cleaning that up. Actually, I'll show you in another video. We'll do that in just a minute, actually. But basically what you've got now is the ability to use a couple different selective tools. You've got the ability to use that refine mask, and then I'm going to show you how to clean up an aberration like this in another video. So I'm going to sign off. I'll clean this up in terms of my saturation, and I'll make you a 3 or 4 minute video on how to get rid of that aberration, that it wasn't removed in the raw process.